First of all, good morning. The yeshiva is a tradition that before Shavuos we made a Yarchei Kallah. Notwithstanding the meaning of the word Yarchei and the meaning of the word Kallah, Yarchei Kallah here is one day. And what happens during the course of the day, you can see the program, is that there are a variety of talks by different yeshiva and so forth. Opportunity for people, parents of the Talmidim and others to come and join us in the yeshiva for a day in preparation for Shavuos. Now the program is still small, it's Sunday morning, but mention al Kubbanim Hashem and we'll learn. And as a psyche, if you will, in a few days is Kabbalah Satera. Wednesday is Kabbalah Satera. Of course, there's two parts to Chag Shavuos. One part of Chag Shavuos is called Matan Torah. Matan Torah means that the Almighty God gives us the Torah. And the second part is Kabbalah Satera, when we receive the Torah. The Eibishter gives, and Kallah the Almighty gives us the Torah. This is another model, another Vada. This is, of course, the Kabbalah Satera, how we receive the Torah. This is the issue which is in our hands. And this is the issue which is, so to speak, our focus. Hashem gives us the Torah. We have to take the Torah. And of course, it's important to appreciate that when we see the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, has to translate practically into Limud HaTorah, to learn Torah all year, and to learn Torah with the Hatzlacha, with the Gishmak, and ultimately it means simply to learn and understand the Eibishter's Torah. But of course, by Yidden and especially by Hasidim, on Shavuos itself, the day of Shavuos itself, the focus is on the idea that Torah is coming from Hashemayim. Torah comes from us from the Eibishter, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And there are many things that we do to underscore, to emphasize, so to speak, the God within the Torah, the godliness of the Torah, the Lashon HaGemara. And no nafshi, there are nafshi, there are shetekes, and no nafshi, so this is the house. Nafshi is a deviation that Fayachal, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and no means I. Nafshi, the Pashtus means Rotz. Sovis, Yehovah, Hashem, I wrote my will into my Torah, and I gave it to him. It says in Medrash, on the top of the will be Truma. That Oisi Atam Loichim. When a Yid learns Torah means taking HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself. And the focus on Shavuos is on the Oisi Adam within HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There are many examples of this in how we celebrate Shavuos. And one of them, which is something closer to us, is the idea that the Rebbe spoke many times over the last few years, that on the first day of Shavuos we should bring everybody to shul, including newborns, including infants, which is practically, it's impractical and it's not very helpful. You sure you have to come to the Gavan and the Minhagis and the first day Shavuos, people come with their carriers, with their newborns and so forth. And as a consequence, it's noisy in shul, it's difficult to hear, and the Rebbe insists that we should bring even infants, newborns to shul, and the pshat is pushed. Just like by the original Aseres HaDibros. When Hashem did the day of the Klal Har Sinai, on Vov Zayin Sivan in Shnas Beis Alof and Tov Memches, the year 2448, there was a Noshim Raf. Everybody was present, although they were different. Bolas, they were different Yeshuyas. Everybody stood at Har Sinai. They were ungiven to B'nai Torah, or to men, or to adults, or to intelligent people. Torah was given even to a Ben Yerim, Torah was given to everybody. So the Rebbe says when it comes Shavuos, we have to do the same thing again. You bring even newborns to the shul to receive the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like the Eibush gave it the first time. And then Chagav, as a parenthesis, another idea which the Rebbe was very preoccupied, which is also the same concept as the concept of Hakel. Hakel is not every year, Hakel is once in 7 years. And Hakel also is Anosh Nataf. If you're familiar with the complications and Lumdis, it's one of the few instances where Midei Raisa brought children to a mitzvah. Children don't have mitzvahs. There's mamash a handful of mitzvahs where Minat Torah children are involved. And one of those mitzvahs, which is written in the Fedish and the Chumash, is Hakel. Of course, there's a lot of sikhs and discussions on it. Hakel was a mitzvah where newborns had to be in shul. To be in the Beis HaMikdash, men, women, and children. And of course, even though on the other angle it says Yarchei was a forcha, but Hakel was everybody. And it says in the Rambam why? Because Hakel was supposed to be a reenactment of Maimon Har Sinai. And the Melech was Shliach Kel. So when the king read from Sefer Devarim on Hakel, he was a Shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, was representing the Eibishter. And the idea of Hakel was to reenact, to create again the mind of the mountain of Har Sinai. And by Har Sinai, there was no such thing as Torah being given only to those who could learn it. A whole year, Torah is based on your level. Like the Example of Rashi is based on the Gemara, that this was the same day of Torah. Moshe Rabbeinu first taught Adam. It's a Rashi in Pashas Kisisa. Then he taught Mother and Aviv. Then he taught the Shivim Skate. Then he taught the whole Klal Yisrael. Because when it comes to learning Torah, it's different madrigas. Not everybody can learn the Torah on the same level. To say it differently, not everybody can hear in the Torah so many levels. Adam heard 4 levels, so when you heard it 4 times, Mother and Aviv would have only heard 3 levels, even if they heard it 10 times. So they only heard it 3 times. The Shivim Skate heard 2 levels, but if they heard it a 3rd time, they would not have heard any more. So the male, they heard it only twice. Kallah heard it once because hearing it twice would not have added anything. So when it comes to learning Torah, there's madrigas. But when it comes to the event of Matan Torah, Kabbalah Torah, everybody is exactly the same. And like the Rambam writes, what is the point of Hakel? Every 7 years you gather people together. And you give them the Torah again. What's the priority for Yodel Hashem Lekeiah? In other words, Hakel was about creating again Har Sinai. But which aspect of Har Sinai was primary at Hakel, not Talmud Torah, but Yiras Hashem? Not how one is able to learn the Torah, but how one through the Torah is connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rebbe said the same as Shavuos. Since spiritually every year of Shavuos, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the Torah again. Therefore, on Chag Shavuos, it's very appropriate to bring even newborns to shul. And the purpose of bringing newborns to shul is not because this newborn is going to be able to learn Torah tomorrow, but because this newborn already has a connection, a real connection, to the union of Yiras Hashem, a connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And for this reason, that even a newborn is born to brought into this method, to shul, to basic Knesset. And this is the, so to speak, the priority, the emphasis of Chag Shavuos, by Chassidim, by Yidden, by Chassidim especially, that on Shavuos we focus on the God within the Torah, the Elokus within the Torah. The Chochmas HaTorah begins after Shavuos. But nevertheless, if a person wants to have a connection to the Elokus of the Torah, you have to learn the Chochmas HaTorah. You connect to the Eibishter by living with that Torah. So one of the things that we do as Achana B'Matan Torah is we have this Yarchei Kallah. And this year, I'm beginning, starting. So I gave you a lot of papers. I'm going to start simple, okay? The Shia is basically 2 series of the Rebbe, which reveal a Shita of the Rebbe in Rambam, which is extraordinary. I'm sure there are more examples for this Chiddush, this Vod, this Gedanke of the Rebbe throughout the Rambam, that I don't know of them. These 2 are quite famous. They're actually moving to see this. And I want to this observation, this Kiddush, this cook that the Rebbe has on Rambam as our discussion for this morning. But let's begin simple. If you turn to page 1, you have a Rambam relations. And if you look where I underlined, it says Teda at the beginning of the line, Ki al derech ha'emes, how is it a Kallah? HaKosuf Yagid. Why? Because HaKosuf Yagid B'Tarteinim v'yim is B'Rayim. The first pasuk in Bereshit has a lot of Rabbi, as it does a lot of Rashi, a lot of everybody, right? And of course, one of the kashas that's asked in the first pasuk of Bereshit is why it says Bereshit Bara Lakim and not Lakim Bara Bereshit. The Gemara already makes this observation. Why does it say Bereshit Bara Lakim? Bereshit Bara Lakim sounds like the beginning created God. That's the Chovevei translation. Bereshit Bara Lakim doesn't sound right. Why does it say? You should say Lakim Bara God created the beginning instead of the beginning created God. And Rashi has many answers, all kinds of different, innumerable answers to this question. Why is it Bereshit Bara Lakim? And the Rambam gives also many answers, but he finishes off by saying, I'm going to give you an answer on Kabbalah. How can I give you an answer on Kabbalah to Apostle Chumash? So his excuse is, so to speak, his head is, because HaKosov Yagid B'Tarteinim v'yim B'Rayim, which means that the Rambam is saying that we have a cloud, and Ein Mikra Yetzi B'Dei Pshuta. Ein Mikra Yetzi B'Dei Pshuta means the Torah speaks to us in our world, and in as much as the Torah speaks to us in our world, we have our perspective. Says the Rambam, you should know, although it's true that it's Merabes B'Rayim. In other words, the Rambam is saying, although on the first level, on the initial approach, Torah, or the most basic approach, the most obvious approach, the most direct approach, Torah is speaking to us in our world. There's a Yirmiz B'Rayim, there's also what Rebbe is, but the Torah is in the higher worlds. And the Rebbe is, but the Torah is in the higher worlds, and the reason it says Bereshit Bara Lakim is because Bereshit is Chachma, and Lakim is Bina, and so forth. And this is a Zayah. This Ramban is really a Zayah. The Ramban probably never saw the Zayah, the Pashtas. But this idea that in the process, Bereshit Bara Lakim, Eisa Shemaim, Eisa Haaretz, you have the 10 Sfidas in order is a Zayah. And the Ramban says this is why it says Bereshit Bara Lakim. Not the Lakim Bara Bereshit al derech hasoyin, because it goes into 10 Sfidas. But the Ramban's lashon in answering this question, how come it says Bereshit Bara Lakim, not the Lakim Bara Bereshit? Because when you say it in that order, you have the 10 Sfidas, is because HaTorah medaberes b'tachtonim, or HaMedes b'Rayim. In other words, the Ramban, so to speak, needs a header, so to speak, to explain the pasuk this way. Why? Because he holds that Torah is first of all b'tachtonim, first of all on earth, second of all in heaven, and in as much as the second of all is concerned, it gives you a tenet that when you say Bereshit first, then Bara, then on the king you have 10 Sfidas Kisidun. This is an Rambam. Now turn the page, please. Page 2. Now don't think I'm a Gon and don't think I'm a Baki. I hope you got me for the good as my genius is from the depths of others for the good as This is from the Sodom Mamoras of Rabbi Panu. Rabbi Panu was a very, very famous God who lived in Italy. He wrote a lot of Sodom. He wrote Sodom and Nigre, he wrote Fasim Zuta, there's Chuvas from the Rabbi Panu. He was also very, very cool. And there's a lot of Kabbalah from him, very reliable. You can see this Kabbalah brings the Rabbi Panu constantly. He wrote a lot of Sodom Kabbalah. His most famous sefer he called Sodom Mamoras. He was a Talmud Talmid of Arizal. He was a very interesting person. He was very wealthy. He was a very big collector of Sodom. And in his chus, a lot of kids, will say he was a personality. He was a big person. And he wrote a sefer called Sodom Mamoras. And the sefer of Sodom Mamoras, he disagrees with the Rambam. Look at what I underline. It says, "Hamateda shemedaberes ba'etzem." Exactly the opposite of the Rambam. The Torah speaks first of all in the heavens. And he hints in a secondary way. In other words, when you learn in Chumash, you were learning a heavenly Torah. That Torah was written before the creation ever happened. And if the Torah was written before it ever happened, before Abraham existed, Abraham already existed. And the Abraham HaGashmi comes after the Abraham HaRuchti. Now, this is complicated, and of course there's different shivas about this, because he's not getting into questions of free will and so forth. But this is a Talmudic approach. First of all, Torah is Bashamayim, and then from Shamayim, the Eibishter gave us the Torah Ba'aretz, and then Torah the Beretz Ba'ayedim, and he's never B'shir Torah. So the Rambam Pano says exactly the opposite of the Ramban. And then he picks on the Ramban. Afapi Shaharamban, the Pashas Bereshit, says the Rambam, even though the Ramban says differently, Lei Kasav Kain doesn't say this, and then he says why. The Ramban follows the Maimer HaMefurtzim, the famous Pisko, that the Torah speaks in the language of man. So the Rameh says about the Ramban that since the Ramban was affected or held by the Gemara, he therefore held the Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim, Yagid B'Tachtenim V'Yin Mizbal. Now, Rabbi said, this minor, this phrase, Dibra Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim, is a Gemara to many places in Shas. In Sifrei Machshava, let me say, in works of theology, as opposed to halacha, the expression Dibra Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim is used mostly al derech hasefer. That means al derech hachakira. The Mekubalim didn't use this expression Dibra Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim because the Mekubalim actually explained the various forms or expressions, nuances of the Torah. The Chovevei, for whatever reasons, they couldn't explain Yad Hashem and Ein Hashem and all these other things literally. So they say, Dibra Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim. The Mekubalim didn't have those problems because they could explain Yad Hashem and Ein Hashem on the spheres. So one of the big differences between the Chaykim and the Mekubalim is that the Chaykim use frequently this expression, and the Mekubalim don't. So listen to what's happening here. The Ramban says, Al derech ha'emes. Derech ha'emes means Kabbalah, yeah? And he said, Al derech ha'emes, ha'kosav yagid b'tachtenim, v'yimid b'ayedim, and he explains the possibility of the The Rambam Panu disagrees with the Ramban, and says, you know why the Ramban says what he says? Because of Dibra Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim. Employing Dibra Torah Kosav B'Tachtenim in this case is not Kabbalah, it's Chakira. I find it very ironic. And I don't want to focus on this. This is not the purpose of the Shir. I just simply want to say, and of course I'm treading on very thin ice, I don't think that Ramban would agree with the Rambam Panu's reason for why he says what he says. In other words, it's clear that the Rambam is saying something different than the Ramban. But the Rambam is also telling you why the Ramban says what he says. But I don't think the Ramban is saying it for the reason that the Rambam gives. Because the Rambam is suggesting that the Ramban is saying it, in effect, al derech hachakira. You can't explain it. I don't think that's something that Ramban would. And in fact, in this stack someplace, there is a Ha'ara from the Rebbe. I'm going to put the Sichos. If you have page 7, Ha'ara 55, yeah, the Rebbe brings this stira, this machlokes, so to speak, between the Ramban and the Rambam, and he writes, Loshen HaRamban, Reish Chalav Al B'Sefer, Hudu B'Chalav Al Sham, אבל יש לומר שאין הכרח לומר שהרמב"ן פוליג. In other words, when you read the Rameh himself, you get the impression that the Rameh holds that him and the Ramban are arguing. And if him and the Ramban are arguing, the argument in effect is that the Ramban is going on the Seichel and the Rameh is going on the Kallah. And the Rebbe is loved after. It doesn't have to be a machlokes Chacham. And the Hasbara Shabbat is very cautious. These two expressions that Ramban says are taken in the Vedas Mitachtorim, it's on earth. And they're speaking only in the secondary way. And the Rameh says exactly the opposite. That Atayim with Averes, the reason these two are not a contradiction is because there's two in Yonah and David. And if you have page 7, you can see that Rebbe writes the answer in the two paragraphs in the middle column. There's an arrow next to it. They've asked the question very simple. There's two in Yonah and David. There's Torah as Chachmasei Shalach Baruch Hu. There's Torah as God's wisdom. And there's Torah as it communicates the mitzvahs. In other words, there's Torah as it communicates the Ratzon. What is the difference between Torah how it communicates the Eivish's Chachmas and Torah how it communicates the Eivish's Ratzon and the mitzvahs? The question is that. When it comes to mitzvahs, Torah lei b'shamayim, there simply is no mitzvahs in heaven. There's mitzvahs only on earth. When it comes to Chachmas HaTorah, everybody understands that the Torah is written from my law, it's Shlei Be'erach that is written from my law. If you look inside, it's a skate still in it. You see what I'm reading? There's no contradiction. Some Kallah as Hamaisa Mu'ayikeh, the most important thing is action. The Alderah of the Benegid to Torah, the Kallah as Torah lei b'shamayim. How can we say the Torah is first in heaven and on earth? Everybody knows Hamaisa Mu'ayikeh and Torah lei b'shamayim. While the Ratzon Elin is, the will of Hashem is, that mitzvahs are here in this world of Kipshuta. And in as much as that is concerned, that Rambam is saying the truth. Not he's saying the truth, he's saying the truth. According to Kabbalah, when you are learning Torah on the level of halacha, of Maaseh, Torah with the Vedas B'Tafteim, Rebbe's Mishkin is B'Yeh. What the Rameh is talking about is Chochmas. When it comes to Chachmas HaTorah, it's the other way around. Next paragraph. When you're not talking about doing Torah mitzvahs, but learning and understanding Torah mitzvahs, it's Adarabah. To the contrary, the Makar of Kallah from Torah mitzvahs is L'mayla. It all begins L'mayla. So what I'm suggesting is that the Rameh suggests that him and the Ramban have an argument, and the argument has to do with whether the Ramban is saying something about Chasad or Seichel. And the idea is, this is all over Chassidus, but perhaps the Rebbe is even suggesting it here, that they're both talking about Kabbalah, they're both talking about the same level of Torah, but they're talking about two different things. The Ramban is talking about mitzvahs HaTorah, in other words, doing Torah, this is for sure, only about Torah, and the Ramban is speaking about Chachmas HaTorah. And by the way, on page 3, I brought the Tanya. In effect, the Tanya says the same thing, but I'm going to skip the Tanya because I showed it to you. The Sikha is much more direct, much easier for us to understand. The problem is, when you say that Torah has two things, on the one hand, Torah teaches how to do mitzvahs, and Allah Maaseh, Torah lei b'shamayim, you know that. And on the other hand, you say Torah reveals Chachmasei Shalach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in as much as Torah reveals Chachmasei Shalach HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to the contrary, Torah with the Vedas B'Yonim, it's more, first of all, the higher worlds, and only afterwards the lower worlds, and so forth and so on. The problem is, how do you determine where does Torah end and mitzvahs begin? In this overlap, maybe she gave us one statement. And all of us know the Lashon has always brought a Reisem and Chachma Naftis. Reisem and Chachma Naftis, Torah comes from Chachma. The emes of Torah is much higher than Chachma. How do you discern? How do you separate out when Torah is medaberet for Yoenim and when we're dealing with mitzvahs, which is medaberet b'tachtonim? In other words, all of Torah is always true in heaven. But on earth, in as much as mitzvah Torah are concerned, it's not always the same. How do you discern? How do you weed out? How do you figure out when you're learning one Torah? You don't have two Torahs. You have one Torah. When you should look at the Torahs, and when you should say it becomes very sensitive. It's very, very involved. Here are two series, two examples. One is an example from Refuah. You have Refuah in Torah, and the other is an example from Kiddush and Chedesh. Let me give you two simple examples. I don't want to get too caught up on it. Let me give you two simple examples. One example is Karbanas. We can't do Karbanas as Manazeh. We can't. And the question becomes, how can we? David gave us a mitzvah. How can we can't do the mitzvah? And the answer is that the world doesn't allow us to do the mitzvah. Why doesn't the world allow us to do a mitzvah? Because you don't have a Beis HaMikdash, you don't have a Mizbeach, and most importantly, you don't have Yad Yisrael Akifa. You're not in a position to go back to Kabbalas. Rambam holds, Makivim Kabbalas, Afbi Sheishal Bayis, but you need to have the koyach to do it. And at this point, you can't do it. Another example, a slightly different example, which is brought in one of these years, is the example from the erasing of the 7 nations. Erasing the 7 nations. According to the Rambam, it's considered one of the Yad Mitzvahs. But erasing the 7 nations is impossible. Because the 7 nations are gone, they don't exist. Either they were killed, or they assimilated. Like it says in Chazal, Sachar mixed up the whole world. And after Sachar mixed up the whole world, there were no pure races, no pure nations. It's impossible to identify who the 7 nations. And of course, since Sachar moved everybody about, so it's no longer Kavua, which is Kimet Samechze, but it's Rein, and most Goyim are not in Shara Ahmed, so the Din of the Chayak on the Neshama goes away. But it's still considered one of the Yad Mitzvahs. That means that you have ideas in Torah that remain in Torah, but the world does not accommodate it. The world does not allow for it. So you have two concepts. One concept is Halacha L'Maisa. How do I do a mitzvah practically in this world? When I'm doing the mitzvah practically in this world, the first reality is this world. A second concept is to learn Torah, to understand Torah. And as the Rebbe always says, originally it's to learn a lesson from the Torah. In as much as learning lessons from the Torah are concerned, you don't necessarily have to learn a lesson. To do something, you have to learn a lesson that teaches you Midas and Ma'aseh Torah and Drachim Torah and Deis Torah and so forth. When it comes to learning a Hayrah from the Torah, every idea in the Torah, even those ideas in the Torah that I'm not able to practice or play with, because the world does not permit me, I can still learn from. But in as much as this is concerned, it's the other way around. The first truth is the Ruchniistic truth, and the second truth is the Gashmiistic truth. So let's go to the series. Okay, I don't want to get too farkoch. I want to focus on the series. The Rebbe brings, so we have in the Gemara a whole series of remedies. A whole series of remedies to cure all kinds of illnesses. The strangest remedies in the world. They really are very, very strange remedies. I want you to know the Rebbe has a note. Somebody wrote to the Rebbe that these remedies are so arcane and they're so superstitious. So the Rebbe has a number of answers, and one of the things he writes is, it's not so crazy after all. Go to a lab and see how they produce medicines. You'll see it's also pretty crazy. Remedies, a whole bunch of remedies have in the Shas. Similarly, in the same vein, we have in the Rambam a diet. The Rambam doesn't give remedies for illnesses. The Rambam gives a diet to stay healthy. The Rambam says a person is sick, he has to go to a doctor. And for those who do not know, the Rambam wrote Sifrei Refuah. There are books of medicine from Rambam which have been translated. I actually bought them. I thought they may have some use to me, but they're completely impossible to read. with medicine before. Rambam was a doctor. He was a doctor, a king, and a lot of the medicines describe the kinds of issues he dealt with when he was dealing with the Sultan and his court. But in the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam did not put any medicines, any remedies, any healing methods. But he provides a diet, how to eat, what to eat, when to eat, what times of the year, and so on. And the Rambam writes that any person who's going to follow his diet, I promise you, you'll never know illness in your entire life, unless you were sick with Yossi. The person, sometimes the person is going to Yossi not well, so then they have to deal with that. But if a person started, the Eibishter gave him, so they go for a healthy body, they follow the Rambam's diet, will be healthy. But the Rebbe's kasha is that side on these remedies in the Gemara, as well as on these, the details of the diet, which Rambam describes Balarichas, okay, down there is. It says in Shulchan Aruch that the Nishtanu Ativim, people's natures changed. And if people's natures change, these diets are not only not helpful, they may be the opposite of. These remedies are not only not helpful, they may be the opposite. So you're not allowed to follow the remedies found in the Gemara and the diet found in the Rambam. So you take the Shulchan Aruch because the Nishtanu Ativim. The Rebbe has a question to Kasha. The Kasha is on Tevei Nitzkis. The Torah is eternal. And if the Torah is eternal, it speaks to all people at all times and all places. How can you come along and say, oh, this idea in Torah has an asterisk? Although it's Torah, does not always apply. This is the Kasha. The Rebbe asks. It's a Gavaldik Kasha. And the Rebbe's teretz is this Ramban. This Rameh, which begins on page 6 at the bottom. Okay, 6 line numbers on the left. And the Rebbe's kasha is, how can you come along and say that certain ideas in Torah are no longer applicable? And by the way, the real question is, if you say certain ideas in Torah are no longer applicable, so how do you know what they are and what not? Some things you say that since the Teva of the world changed no longer apply. Other things you say, no, Torah never changes. How do you reconcile? How do you balance that out? So the Rebbe says, I'm reading inside, at the bottom of page 6, the Rebbe's explanation is, by prefacing on a basic idea about all of Yiddishkeit. And the Rebbe brings what I showed you in the introduction, the Rebbe Pam. So you do it the Kallah, the Chazal. There's a rule in Chazal, Torah speaks first of all in heaven. When it means in the secondary way, the lower world. Page 7. Und der Schluss meint, das meint es nicht. Nicht, dass die Yonim was stehen in Torah. It's not that the ideas written in the Torah werden hauptsächlich gemeint, wie sie sein in Ramat in Gashmis, are intended primarily as they are in Gashmis. Und es ist bei der Rebbe, wenn die Yonim will sein Beruchnis, als sie hinter ist Beruchnis, I'm skipping what I didn't underline. Now forget it's exactly the opposite. The essence, speaks in essence in the higher worlds. Wie die Yonim seine Beruchnis haben, ist spiritually. Und es dabei not Meramis, it's only hinting also, the Yonim is not that the is first of all a godly Savior that reflects a godly reality. And in addition to reflecting a godly reality, there is pain as it manifests down here. So the Rebbe makes the following arguments. And Rabbi said, I'm here. I'm on page 7, the third column from the right. When Torah read, wegen Heroes in Yoni Refuah or Zebulans B'chul. When Torah speaks about healing and remedies and so forth, it's speaking first of all of the higher worlds. Das heißt beätzen und zum allererst in essence and first of all, werden sie gemeint, wie sie seinen Beruf ist, it's talking about the spiritual reality. Und erst danach, and only afterwards, wie I saw from an essence, as a result of the fact that Torah is in essence in the heavens. Und am Chovevei, when it comes from it, werden sie nicht darstellen, they descend to us, und kommen herab lamata, they come down to this world of Gashmis. Says the Rebbe, as the ideas are spiritually, they're eternal. And they apply down here as well. Provided that the heavens and the earth match. In other words, what the Rebbe is saying is very simple. It's a very brilliant, it's a profound thing. What's so wonderful about the Rebbe Sichel is that the Rebbe learned this into the Rambam. This is a Kabbalistic idea, it's a mystical idea. But the Rebbe holds, this is what the Rambam holds. And the Ikir Raya, the Ikir, I think in Halacha, in Nigler, the Ikir Chiddush is in the second seal, which I'm going to show you soon, Kiddush HaChiddush. There's something called Adam Ha'elyon. Adam Ha'elyon, in our culture, is Atzilus. Adam Ha'elyon is the image in which the Eibishter created everything. Torah comes from Adam Ha'elyon. We all know that there's something called Hishtashlos. Hishtashlos means that from Adam Ha'elyon comes to another Adam, and another Adam until this world. And the way the Eibishter designed creation is that they're parallel, they match. Just like you have 10 spheres in Atzilus, you have 10 spheres in Bria, you have 10 spheres in Yitzhak, 10 spheres in one world brings to the next world, brings to the next world. Inasmuch, or so long, as this world reflects Adam Ha'elyon perfectly, every idea of Torah that exists in Atzilus is practically relevant in Asiyah. If this earth mirrors exactly the higher world from which it comes, that in turn mirrors exactly the higher world from which it comes till the highest world, every idea of Torah which is written in Atzilus applies in Asiyah. What happens, however, when there's a disalignment? When the whole world is no longer reflecting exactly the higher worlds. You can call it by a lot of names. You can call it Klippa, you can call it Golas, you can call it whatever you want. But what happens when this earth ceases to reflect Adam Ha'elyon? At the moment this world ceases to reflect Adam Ha'elyon, the world is not a perfect match. And if it's not a perfect match, then not every idea which is written in the Torah as it is in Elyon applies in Tachton. So the Rebbe says that the Gemara, which was written over 2,000 years ago, wrote remedies. The Rambam, who existed less than 1,000 years ago, wrote diets. Now, without going into the Arichis, if anybody wants to read the Arichis is on page 8. There's Gewaltige, there is Gewaltige Makaitis for this. He brings the Tumim, he brings the Shidin Makaitis, which are very, very, very important. That speaks about the idea of Ruach HaKodesh. Ruach HaKodesh means that every one of the B'nai Yisrael, in all of their time, when they took a pen, and they wrote on paper, they tell you the Eibishter was writing. And as a result, even if we were to say, and we'll never know, but even if we were to say that when the Gemara wrote those remedies were reflecting the remedies that were prevalent in the times of the Shas, as some people love to say. And that even if we were to say that the diet that the Rambam writes is reflecting what was considered health in dieting in the times of the Rambam, the Goyish world, but when the Shas, when the Rambam incorporated these aspects of medicine and of diet, by no means is it all into Torah, this is a part of Chachmasei Shalach HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the Torah and the Beres B'Oyonu. In other words, whatever they were thinking consciously is one thing. But because of the idea of Ruach HaKodesh, so when they wrote in the Torah, they were reflecting not dieting, as they understood dieting, not remedies and remedies. They were writing Torah Semes, which was Tzula Lafona before the English created the world, the Torah existed. And in that Torah, there were these remedies, and in that Torah, there was this diet, and it was revealed to us, remedies in the times of the Shas, the diet in the time of the Rambam, for reasons that are known only to the Eibishter, but these words are Torah 7. In the times of the Shas, the remedies were practical. In the times of the Rambam, the diet was practical, because the Eibishter decided, for reasons that are known only to him, that at that particular point in history, this aspect of Torah should be aligned, heaven and earth should match. But if there comes a later time, when there is a disalignment, when Shemayim and Aretz, when Elyonim and Tachtonim don't match, the Torah remains emes. In other words, the diet of the Rambam is still Torah, the remedies of the Gemara are still Torah, but you're not allowed to do them because our guf is disaligned, is out of alignment with the Torah. And this is the Rebbe's tenets. How could it be that you have the Refuas HaShatz, medicines in the Gemara, and they have the diet of the Rambam? It's part of the Torah Yitzchis. And you're not going to do it, you're not allowed to do it. And the answer is because it's Torah. Torah is Balyonim, and it's possible that the Torah Balyonim is no longer aligned with Tachtonim because the world is out of alignment with Torah, which is Balyonim. And Derech Hagam, as I'm talking, I'm thinking, the Rebbe spoke this in 30 years ago. We believe in the Mispodim, Tavshin Mem Gimel. The Sichas are printed. This Likud that I am referring to is Tavshin Mem Gimel. The Geder Rebbe came to the Rebbe, the Birchas Menachem Alter, or Shalom, and the Rebbe brought up the subject. If this is before we started learning Rambam. In other words, now all of us are big key by Rambam. In those days, we didn't know Rambam existed. Yeah? This is Mem Gimel. And the Rebbe brought up the subject of Nitzchias HaTorah to him. And I heard from people, when the Gedei saw, one of the things that used to happen was Gedei would come visit the Rebbe. All of the time was Yechidus was private. But Yechidus stopped. The Rebbe was no longer seeing people privately. But he was still Makabel Gedei Yisrael. The Rebbe was Mamash always. Ever since Gedei Yisrael came, the Rebbe was Makabel. The Rebbe Marashi and so forth. The Gedei Rebbe had an open door by the Rebbe. All of them. At that point, of course, they were not the Gedei Rebbe, the brother of the Gedei Rebbe, and so on. And the Rebbe, so they used to write a transcript. The Rebbe used to speak to them. It was a shmuz of table. Eventually, everybody would be asked to leave the room, and the Rebbe would sit alone and talk in Yom HaSkodah, so they talked in private. But the public part of it was recorded, and they would write a notice. The Rebbe, it was an Efruzah D'Eliyahu that came from the Rebbe. The Rebbe spoke to the Birchas Menachem Alter about this inyan from Yitzchak HaTorah. And when they wrote up the Hanacha, the Rebbe was rushing it. The Rebbe ended Magiyah right away. And for sure, so that means 5 weeks later, you can see the date. The date was Dalet Iyar Tavshin Mem Gimel. And for sure, as the Likud came out, it wasn't the Sicha of Abnegin. The Rebbe put himself totally into this question of Nitzchias HaTorah. And he pushed them to give out a Likud. Sure, stuff from Gimel came out this Likud. And then there were long sichos, very long sichos. Shavuos Mem Gimel, and then the Shabbos after Shavuos, I believe, where the Rebbe talked further about the inner Nitzchias HaTorah. I don't know if I'm opening a can of Gaban's movies by sharing this with you, but I just want you to know that the Rambam writes in Erev Nevuchim. This is what a lot of Chovevei quote this, that if and when the science will change, you should change the Rambam. Say you should take the man who give him a pay to Dalet. In case you need to all up, okay, it doesn't look good. But if the science will change, you should change the Rambam. They should take the Rambam. And there's also a children from Haigon, I believe, which has a similar thing. And the Rebbe says that when the Rambam wrote, the Eibush was writing with his pen. When the Rambam wrote, especially in the Sefer of Halachos, a diet, it's no longer the Rambam, it's the Eibish's. And Chachach, the Rambam himself writes in the Meir Neruch that even when the science changes, he changed the Torah. So the Rebbe says once the Rambam ordered the Torah becomes part of Torah Yitzchak. I don't have time to tell you the whole Sikha. The Sikha is very, very long. But I'm encouraging you to be aware that the Rebbe spoke Shavuos aside. Shavuos and after Shavuos, on one hours, arguing, so to speak, a Hasidic shite, our day, in Nitzchias HaTorah. And we say that every single word of the Rambam is absolutely emes. Kedua, the famous controversy about the Rebbe holds, that the Rambam holds a different statement, that the sun circles the earth. I'm just mentioning it because it's important for us to know what we believe. If Torah says something, including a Rambam, even though the Rambam himself writes that when the science changes, you change the Rambam, then once the Rambam wrote it into Yarchei, which is the Sefer HaHalacha, it's a part of Nitzchias HaTorah. But regarding this question, this was the Rebbe's idea. Torah never changes, but it's possible the world is disaligned. I want to show you another example of this. And the second example is very, very compelling. Very, very compelling. And it begins on page 8, and 9. Shnas HaChama, how long is a solar year? How long is a year? Everybody knows that our calendar is crazy. To say it in a few short sentences, there's no such thing as a lunar year, there's no such thing as a solar month. There's no such thing as a year of moons. The year of a moon is 29 and a half days, or whatever the cheshbon is. 29 days, 12 hours, or a tough shit design, Kallah, right? Yeah? When you add up 12 moons, it doesn't mean anything. It's an arbitrary, it's a man-made idea that 12 moons equals a year. On the other hand, the idea that a solar month is whatever it is, Yossi 30 or 31 days according to the Grecian calendar, there's no such thing as a solar month. It's completely arbitrary. Or to say it correctly, the lunar year is 29 and a half days, and the solar year is 365 and a quarter days. That's all there is. A year made of lunar months is an artificial creation, and the division of a solar year into months is also an artificial creation. Why did they create 12 solar months? Because it's very hard to say today, Hayom, day 274. So they came up with whatever the dates are, the Goyish calendar, with all of its intricacies and inventions and creations and modifications and renewals and so on. On the other hand, there's no such thing as a lunar year. So in ancient times, which translates basically to people who are not so smart, they saw the cycle of the moon. They had a hard time, still had a hard time figuring out the cycle of the sun. So they counted moons. They counted moons. People kept track of time by counting moons. And they figured out how long the lunar month is, approximately 29. In other words, every 2 moons is 59 days, more or less. And people used to count moons. The ancient calendars counted moons. People got smarter. They started to notice the pattern of the cycle of the sun. And by the way, there's a Medrash that says the Fedish that Adam and Ish already figured out the sun. So when Goyim tell you that this is an invention that's more modern than Baba Maisa, and they figured out the sun's pattern, and they developed the solar year. The difference between the solar year and the lunar year is about 11 and a half days. Our calendar combines the sun and the moon. The Torah calendar combines the sun and the moon. Why does it combine the sun and the moon? Because we believe in months. There's no such thing as a solar month, only a lunar month. Or to say it in a Hasidic expression, the moon cycles. The moon has highs and lows, it ebbs and flows. The Jewish people cycle. We also, you saw, they want a Jews peak, and then they babble, and then they peak again, they almost disappear, and then they grow up. Yet not compared to the moon, you have a lunar existence. And by the way, for those who do not know the meaning of the word moon, it's Mishra, lunatic, and moon. The moon, I'll say it's in Russia, the word for the moon is moon. But we also have Chovevei. We believe in seasons. And seasons have to do with the sun. And consequently, we have to join together the sun and the moon. Of course, the simplest example is Pesach. Yidden left Mitzrayim in spring. Pesach has to be in Chedesh HaAviv. Shomei Chedesh HaAviv Basisa Pesach. Pesach has to be in the spring. If you follow a strictly lunar calendar, if you follow strictly a calendar of the moon, the seasons will move. Every day you'll lose 11 days. Every year you lose 11 days, which means every 3 years the season, the holiday will fall back a month. To say it in plain English, every 36 solar years is 37 lunar years. Every 36 years there's an extra lunar year, which is not our peak, and we have to balance the sun and the moon. We balance the sun and the moon by creating an neighborhood, a leap year. How do you know when to make a leap year? When you make a leap year, when you don't make a leap year. Now, of course, we bought Hashem don't do anything. You go to the store, you buy a calendar. That's how you make a leap year. And the calendar's only been written next year. Talk about a prophecy. This was known 2,000 years ago. But how do you fix a leap year? There's many aspects how you fix a leap year. And one of the aspects in how you fix a leap year is when will Pesach occur? And when will Nisan occur? There's something called Chovevei. Chovevei means seasons. Chachamim could go last year and anticipate. We go forward 12 lunar months from today. When will Pesach fall? If Pesach will fall before Tkufas Nisan, you add another. If Pesach will fall in Tkufas Nisan, you don't add another. So you can anticipate whether you have to make a leap year if, because every year the moon loses 11 days to the sun, Pesach is still going to be in the winter Tkufa, you add it on, then the Pesach isn't listen. But there's two different dinim. And it's very, very subtle. Two different dinim, very subtle. What are two different dinim? One din is that Pesach has to be in Tkufas Nisan. Another din is that Nisan has to be in Tkufas Nisan. One din is that Pesach cannot start if it's still winter. If the Pesach starts 1 day into spring, it's okay. But Pesach, fine. But there's another thing. The other thing is that Nisan has to be in Tkufas Nisan. Now the difference between Nisan and Pesach is a Pasha Pesach. Pesach is the middle of Nisan, right? What happens if Tkufas Nisan is 29 days in Nisan? If the 29th day of Nisan is the Tkufah, what is it? March 21st, let's say. What happened with the 29th day of Nisan? The computer calculated last year for next year. And you anticipate that next year, Pesach will be very early. This is going to be very early, it's going to be part of winter, but the very, very end, the Pesach of Nisan is going to be in Tkufas Nisan. So you have to be Ma'abed Hasham, you have to add a month. So there's two dinim. When it comes to Pesach, yeah. When it comes to Nisan, no. In other words, when you calculate last year what's going to be next year, if Pesach is going to fall before the Tkufa, you have to add a month. If Pesach is going to fall after the Tkufa, you don't have to add a month. That's one din. Rabbi Yontif. There's another din. The Rabbi Nisan, the month of Nisan. If I calculate that the month of Nisan is going to start in the winter, and the very last day of Nisan is going to be in Tkufas Nisan, that's enough. Now you're all looking at me and saying, who cares? Once Pesach has to be in Tkufas Nisan, what do we care about Nisan? The answer is because there's different meaning. There's certain halachas which you have to calculate the spring by Pesach, and other halachas you have to calculate the spring by Nisan. For example, Birkas Hacham. In 1953, Tafshin and Gimel that Birkas Hacham. Everybody knows what Birkas Hacham is. We did it 4 years ago. The next time you're going to do it is in 24 years. A lot is going to change between now and then. But you did it recently. They did Birkas Hachama after Pesach. They did Birkas Hachama after Pesach. Then I said, wait a minute. How do we do Birkas Hachama after Pesach? Birkas Hachama was the first Tuesday in Nisan. How did Birkas Hachama after Pesach? The answer is because that year, Tkufas Nisan, the first Tuesday in Nisan, the first Wednesday in Nisan was the day after Pesach. Isru Chag Pesach. The Rebbe asked that question, how would this be? Wednesday in this is the day after Pesach. When did Pesach start? 8 days before, yeah? 8 days before is winter. Why do we not have the sheep? Here you get something incredible. Look at the Rambam. I hope I didn't confuse you. I think I confused myself, which is a pretty good indicator, yeah? But let's look inside. Shnas HaCham, a solar year, a year of the sun. Yesh mechach me'yisrael she'emrin, v'redoch Chacham ha'morod, shushloish me'ez chamisha v'shish yom u'reviyah. They say that's exactly 365 days and a quarter. Shushei shoyes. V'yesh me'em she'emrin, there are those who say, shu pachas me'reviyah. It's less than that, a little, mamish, a little, a few seconds less than 365 and a quarter days. I want to ask you a very, very dumb question. Since when does the Rambam in Halacha bring us Shittas? Is it not the Rambam's job to paskin? Here the Rambam brings you 2 Shittas. He says those, one Shitta is that a year is 365 and a quarter. The other one says it's 365 and 5 hours, and I forgot the cheshbon. It's mamish a few chalakim. It's a very, very small amount. In a whole mazal of 19 years, it's an hour and chalakim. It's a very, very small difference. And the Rebbe has a portion of kasha. Since when is the Rambam in the business of Mimas Dinim? Shittas. So the Rebbe says that the reason the Rambam gives us Shittas is because both Shittas are halacha. Both of these. It's not either or, both. Why? Listen to this. I'm no expert in Kiddush HaChedesh. The sun revolves around the earth like a corkscrew. What do you mean like a corkscrew? This is the earth. The sun is revolving like this. It's going around. But each time it's going around, it's going lower. And in 365 days, the sun will go like this. I'm being very simplistic now, right? Till the bottom. And then revolve upwards. You get the idea. So after a complete year, the sun will be exactly where it was the year before. The reason we have seasons, according to the Torah, is because the sun's rotation is not every day the same. The sun's rotation goes lower and lower, so then we have a summer, and the South Pole has a winter, and vice versa. But in the course of the year, it revolves. How much time does that complete circle, corkscrew, take? So we have an incredible secret for you. It is very, 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 very slowly getting shorter. As a matter of fact, in other words, the length of the solar year is diminishing very slowly, imperceptibly. Over the course of thousands of years, I guess technically we would say the sun is getting closer to the earth, and the closer it gets to the earth, the quicker its rotation. The solar year is getting a little shorter from time to time. And based on the fact that the solar year is getting a little shorter, the cheshbonos of astronomy change. In fact, Yossi Kallah, who's my expert on the subject, says that in the times of the Rambam, the cheshbonos were different than the Rabbi, and that the Rambam himself does not go lay the truth of the Rabbi, which he brings here. He goes according to the astronomy, which is true in these times. The length of a year is diminishing a little bit. It's a physical fact. But then you have a din and Torah. And the din and Torah is the length of the year is 365 and a quarter days. In other words, there is the Torah and there is the reality. The Torah tells you, as a matter of fact, as a sheet of shul, the length of the year is exactly 365 and a quarter days. There was another Ramada named Rabbi who said it's not true. It's a little bit shorter. And you know what? Rabbi was right. Rabbi was right because Rabbi was telling you the facts. Measure how much time it takes the sun to complete that circle, all the way to the bottom, back up to the top again. It's less than 365 and a quarter. And today it's even less than it was in the times of the Rambam and less than it was in the times of the Rabbi. Again, I'm not an expert in astronomy. This is my experts explain this to me. So what do you do? Torah tells you a year is so long, 365 and a quarter. It's a constant. The reality is that the length of the year is diminishing. So what do? So the Rambam says there's 2 shittas. And both shittas Because some things you do the way Teda is Bashamayim, and other things you do Teda the way it's Ba'aretz. The same Rabbi Planu that we had before. Teda speaks in heaven, yeah? But Halacha L'Maisa, what do you do? Halacha L'Maisa, when you make a calendar, the calendar has to reflect the Teda on earth. And if the length of the year shortens, you have to modify the calendar. When is Pesach? How do you know what Pesach is? You have to figure out when spring starts. But you have to figure out when spring starts, the Matthias, the physical reality. If it's not next spring, you can't make Pesach. If you follow Shmuel's Heshbonus, the spring is going to start in a few days. But if you follow the Ba'al's Heshbonus, spring already started. In other words, the physical reality is now is spring. Shmuel says, Hedachai, it's not spring yet. So what do? So when it comes to fixing Pesach, Pesach has to be B'Aviv, has to be in the spring. Not so metaphysical, exotic, mystical spring B'Payah. So you made Pesach based on what the astronomer will tell you, now is spring. When it comes to Kiddush and Chaydish and the apparent other things as well, which is a ruchnistic idea, we still follow Tkufa Shmuel. And because we still follow Tkufa Shmuel, it's possible that Lagabe Pesach, it's already spring. Lagabe Birchas Chama, it's not spring yet. In other words, here is an example. We have one calendar, and we have one set of Heshbonus. Yet certain aspects in halacha, we say, tell me what are the physical facts. And other aspects in halacha, we say, what are the ruchnistic facts. Lagabe Pesach, we say, what are the physical facts? So you make Pesach, because it's already spring according to the Rabbi. Lagabe Birchas Acham and other things, you don't look at the Metzias HaKash, you look at the Metzias HaRuch. Now, of course, I have exhausted my clock, which I do very effectively, always. Page 13, please. I'm reading what I underlined. Yeah, you see it on the left, yes? It's underlined, yes? The Talmud, the reason why, was the Tkufa Shalmata, that the earthly season is in an Andes man for the Tkufa Shalmata, is it a different time of the heavenly season? Ba'al Oilam is canal, because the world, as mentioned before, Demos Nishroi zu Oifnem the Tkufa Shalmata, is then not worthy of being aligned with the heavenly Tkufa, was is Hecher from Vel, what you say that as well, which is higher than the world can say that as well. In other words, it's possible. I'll say it too straight. Shmuel said the length of the year is 365 days and a quarter. That's how it is in Atzilus. That's what it is in Elyon. Rabbi tells you the reality is not that way, that the solar year is a little bit shorter. So then he says, how could it be? How could Shmuel say that the length of the year is 365 and a quarter, and in reality it's a little bit shorter? And the tendency is that our world has spun out of its alignment. It's no longer matching the living. So when it comes to ruchnistic things, within the world is not a keli for it. Okay, let's read the next paragraph. When is this true? When das is a Metzias verwelt, but this is a worldly reality, that's when you say that the world and the Torah are disaligned. All were the union for Pesach, but the idea of Pesach, Shehiyah Pesach, the plan of Pesach should be in the spring. The Baal das Pesach has attained the Metzias, since Pesach is the Metzias of Torah, when Nimshech the Tkufa Lamata, so the seasons down here is in Zelden Zman, is Lamaila at the same time it is above. This says in other words, as Das was Pesach, in Bizman HaAviv Alamo, the idea that Pesach is always in the spring, is this Oichlei the Tkufa Shalmaila, it's also according to the heavenly Tkufa. Masha'en King B'Yoni Ha'el, as opposed to when it comes to worldly things, is the Hanshachas B'chinas Tkufa Shalmaila and Nandazman. The heavenly Tkufa is in a different time than is in the earthly Tkufa, like Cheshbon for Tkufa Shmuel, it follows the Cheshbon of Tkufa Shmuel. There's a twist here. Talks about two types of things. Torah things and worldly things. For example, Pesach is a Torah idea. The sun is a worldly idea. Torah gave us a mitzvah to make Pesach. In other words, Torah gave us something, the Eibishter gave us something which is completely not from this world. He says, I want you to practice the Pesach in this world. Then you have a son. The Chazal tell us that once in every 28 years you have to say Birkas HaChamah to thank the Eibishter who gave us the son. The difference between Pesach and the sun is that Pesach is completely from the Eibishter. And the sun exists in the world. So everything is now backwards. Because Pesach is not at all a part of this world. When the Eibishter gave us the mitzvah of Pesach, Pesach must always be in this world, even as this world is. In other words, Pesach, which is completely higher than this world, because it's completely higher than this world, as Pesach comes into this world, it's always consistent with this world. Which means that we're asking the world when to make Pesach. The sun, which is a part of the world. When we are thanking the Eibishter for the sun, we are not thanking the Eibishter for the sun as the sun is in this world. We're thanking the Eibishter for the sun as the Eibishter created this man. In other words, the less worldly parts of the Torah come into the world in a more worldly way. The more worldly parts of the Torah come into the Torah in the world in a less worldly way. It's all backwards. And the logic is, something which has no shaykhs to the world is the balabasa of the world. Something which has a shaykhs to the world, the way Torah is the balabasa of the world is because it's higher than the world. So when it comes to Pesach, Pesach is completely otherworldly. Because Pesach is otherworldly, therefore we treat Pesach as the world defines the time of the spring. Because it's impossible that the world should be a stira to something in Torah which is higher than the world. Birkas HaChamah, the shaykhs of the sun. Because Birkas HaChamah, the shaykhs of the sun, you're not saying Birkas HaChamah, the sun as you see it on earth, you're saying Birkas HaChamah to the sun as the sun is in the heavens. In other words, you're coming away from this morning's discussion with a question. So how do you know? When do you say that when the nature changes, the Torah changes? And when do you say Torah never changes? This is the question. And the answer is, those in Yonim and Torah that are completely higher than the world never change. Those in Yonim that are completely higher than Torah because they're completely higher than the world, at any time, at any place, they're Rabbi is over the Mitzvahs of the world. Those in Yonim and Torah, for example, a diet, for example, medical remedies, that have the shaykhs to the world, here you say that these in Yonim, as they are written in the Torah, it's possible that the Torah is not a shaykh to the world. And therefore it's possible there should be B'Yonim and there should be B'Tachtonim. What you're seeing here, and to me this is very, very fascinating, that I'm not very legal in Kallah. But the Rebbe really is teaching us into the Rambam an incredibly pneumistic idea, very spiritually, Hasidic concept. And what the Rebbe is teaching us is simply as follows. There was a Torah, there was a world. The purpose of creation, as the Rebbe says in all the Mashiach Sikhs, which is really the essence of this whole conversation, that when the Mashiach came, if and when you're able to practice every single detail of every single mitzvah in this earth. Kol Zman, there's one part of one mitzvah in which you're not able to practice as an Mashiach didn't come. Why? Because the Kavanah Sabriya, according to the Rambam, is that every idea of Torah that the Eibush gave us in heaven should be able to manifest on earth. Because if there's an aspect of Torah which remains in the heavens and can't come down to earth, that means the earth is not yet a keli for Torah. Or to say it in more idle words, the earth is no longer aligned with the Torah of Hashemayim. What does Mashiach mean? That the earthly Torah in every aspect reflects the heavenly Torah. How do you know that every earthly aspect reflects the heavenly Torah, that every aspect Torah makes it able to practice? Which is the chassidus that we call in our culture dinim etachtoivim. This world becomes a Mashiach world when every single aspect of this world reflects the Torah. And this is that. But just in conclusion, kum tachois, that when Mashiach comes, we'll be able to practice the remedies that are found in Gemara. We'll be able to practice the diet found in Rambam, but it also means that the length of a year is going to change Pashat of Gashmias. That the year has to become longer to be consistent with Kufa Shmuel, Chikat Shmuel, that a year is 365 and a quarter days. This is when the world on earth reflects Torah perfectly, and you're able to become called it out. Okay, I'm sorry I went over time, but you knew I was going to do it. It's not great with that, it's such